Firefighting is essential for our communities, but it's never been easy. Today, with increased heat loads and toxicity, the job's more dangerous than ever before. At MSA, our health and safety drives them to develop highly advanced safety equipment to protect us on the job. MSA's Globe gear is performance and protection in perfect balance. It's designed to meet the challenges we face every day and to keep us safe and healthy during our careers and beyond. Get the full story at msafire.com/globe.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fire Engineering Talk Radio. In this installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, the show dedicated to our great volunteer fire service, and as we have been saying since the show's inception back in 2014, being considered a professional firefighter has nothing to do with earning a paycheck. It has everything to do with delivering competent and compassionate service and taking care of not only our customers, but our own members as well. Tom Merrill here, glad to have you listening in. We're passing through the dog days of summer as we enter mid-August. It's been a beautiful stretch of weather here in my area. You know, Buffalo gets beat up pretty good. That's where I'm from, Buffalo, New York, and we get beat up pretty good because of our tough winters. But I got to tell you, our summers can be quite spectacular, and this year has been one of the best ever. It's just a real shame because so many activities and outside events have been canceled due to the pandemic, and I'm sure it's the same in the area you're in. It's been a tough time, and it's actually kind of depressing not being able to go out and about, travel, and it's prime vacation time, and forcing many people to alter their plans. And us in New York, we can't even really travel outside of New York State. There's like 34 states that if we go visit, when we come back to New York, we have to quarantine for 2 weeks before we can go out and about again, and it's really not possible to do that. So that's forcing so many New Yorkers to have a staycation where they stay home or maybe just stay within New York State. Matter of fact, I just got back from a week up in the beautiful Adirondack Mountains, so it was nice to get away, but it's also tough accepting the new norm, or the norm it's been since March or so, and hopefully things will get back to normal. But it's been tough. You know, even as you probably know, the United Fire Conference was canceled. That was the conference we were so looking forward to. It was the replacement for FDIC, which was canceled back in April. The United Fire Conference was going to be in September, and we were so looking forward to that, and that had to be canceled. It's certainly understandable when you look at the numbers. It's just, it's a tough time right now, but we'll persevere. Hang in there, my friends. We got this. We'll get through this together. So, a couple weeks ago, I was doing my usual daily habit of scrolling through all the online fire service briefs and updates and news stories and articles, and I read a really good informational article on fireengineering.com. It was written by my good friend Tim Zender, who was on the show just a few months ago, if you remember. He was discussing grain bin entrapment emergencies. Anyway, I saw his name, and since I know him, I clicked on the article and I read what he had to say. The article was titled "The Personal Vehicle Response in the Fire Service," and it was really interesting. It truly is a subject that I found unique, and it's unique to our volunteer fire service especially because it's often overlooked. It's just so common that we don't even think about it or pay attention to it. That's driving our own personally owned vehicles to emergency scenes and to the firehouse. So I thought I could spend some time discussing it on a podcast and examine some challenges, some of the issues, the pros and the cons regarding members driving their personally owned vehicle, both to the firehouse and directly to the incident scene. And that's what I'm going to do in my short time with you on this podcast. And again, thanks to my friend Tim Zender for the idea. If you'd like to check out his article, which I highly recommend, it was on fireengineering.com back on July 31st, and it's titled Personal Vehicle Response in the Fire Service. A great topic, not often thought about. A topic we're here to talk about on this show here today. Now, in paid departments and volunteer departments that do staffing, you obviously drive your personal vehicle to the firehouse and park it, so you're really not driving it during an emergency incident. But in many volunteer departments, volunteer firefighters are home or they're out and about doing personal things like shopping, they're at Home Depot, wherever. The tones drop, they get in their POV, personally owned vehicle, and off they go. Now, whether they drive directly to the scene or the firehouse, that could be based on many things, such as department policy. Maybe they're not allowed to drive to the scene and they have to go to the firehouse. Or that department might allow members to drive directly to the scene, so the member bases it whether they're going to drive to the scene or the firehouse on where they are. Are they closer to the incident scene or are they closer to the firehouse? Heck, some fire districts are so large that just makes total sense. They got to drive to the scene because the firehouse is 30 miles away. Now, some only allow certain members, like line officers, to drive directly to the scene. There's a lot of opinions, and people argue pros and cons of either system, and both arguments make sense to me. So, in my opinion, your department, your leaders, need to just figure out what works best in your area. Both systems have some benefits, and you can find problems with both systems as well. Now, in my department, ever since I joined, our policy has allowed members to drive their own vehicle directly to the scene. So if the incident is close to your house or where you happen to be, boom, you drive to the scene. But if you have to pass the firehouse, or you're near the firehouse when the call comes in, or you live near the firehouse, you're encouraged to stop at the firehouse and make sure the rigs get out. But no matter what system is used back home with you, it's important for the professional volunteer department to have some basic rules, some best practices, some rules of the road, let's call them, regarding personally owned vehicle response. Now, over the years, there's been some horrific, tragic stories involving firefighter accidents in their personal vehicle, whether they're responding to the scene or to the firehouse, or whether they've already been parked at the scene. Some really bad things have happened, and both civilians and firefighters have been killed. And our job is dangerous enough, so we really don't want to add to the dangers by driving erratically or recklessly, or because we're not taking the time to talk with our members about driving safely and prudently. You know, it wasn't uncommon in the not too distant past where every year many firefighters were killed driving their personal vehicles. In a 2-decade period that ended in the late 1990s, over 270 firefighters and emergency responders were killed in accidents involving their vehicle. The numbers have come down quite a bit, and that's great. Matter of fact, I just read that a few years ago there were no firefighter fatalities involving firefighters driving their own personal vehicle. But nonetheless, it's still so important to talk about this. We can never get complacent, and we need to ensure we're getting important information out to our new members regarding driving their personal vehicles and reminding our veteran members as well. Regular reminders about driving safely in our personal vehicle. God forbid there's an accident, especially a bad one involving injury or death, because investigators are going to come to the department you belong to, and they're going to knock on that door, and they're going to want to see your policy. And hopefully you have one that you can produce, and it shows that you have a policy, that members have been trained on that policy, and that members have been reminded about the policy on a regular basis. Because remember, you can be held criminally and civilly liable if you're involved in an accident while on duty. And on duty certainly means you're responding to an incident or even a training drill. And in the volunteer ranks, on duty often starts by driving your own personal vehicle. In the agency you represent, your volunteer fire department can easily be brought into the lawsuit. If the drivers of the personal vehicle can make the case that they were not properly trained, or the rules or the policies provided to them were never reviewed with them on a regular basis, it can be bad for that fire department. So what's your policy? There definitely needs to be a department policy, an SOP, an SOG, a best practice, whatever you call it. There needs to be something that outlines personally operated vehicle response. And not just whether members can respond to the scene or have to go to the firehouse, although that should definitely be in the policy. There needs to be a clearly defined policy that the members are aware of and that is reviewed from time to time that talks about driving our vehicles safely. And you need to do it so members can't fall back on, I never knew that, or nobody ever told me when that lawsuit hits. See, we often have policies, and they're often made because somebody did something bad or something happened at one time, and everyone agrees it's a good idea to draft the policy so this doesn't happen again. Heck, some are even named after somebody. But as the years go on, the policy's forgotten about. Or members begin doing things that are contrary to the policy because whatever happened before to cause it in the first place, well, that was a long time ago and hasn't happened again. Or members blatantly disregard a policy because, well, that was designed for something that really doesn't happen here. It doesn't even happen that often. Like that vehicle spotter policy. How often does somebody get run over by the apparatus backing over them? And it never happens here anyway. It always happens to them. Policies enacted with somebody's name on them or because something bad did happen are usually the hot topic for a while. But without proper leadership, without officer and senior members being aware of and supporting the policy, it can easily be forgotten about or ignored altogether. And then you have new members come aboard and they're not even aware that the policy exists. They don't know any better. So having a policy is one thing, but members need to be reminded that the policy exists and it has to be in place. So let's talk about that. Let's examine some of the pros and cons of driving to the scene or having to drive to the firehouse and some various other things that go into personal operated vehicle operations in the volunteer fire department. What should go into the policy? That often forgotten about policy, and what should we train on? Just like your department probably takes a decent amount of time and many hours of instruction when teaching members how to drive the big rigs, the emergency apparatus, at least I hope they do, it is so important to take the time to talk to the members and teach them how to operate and drive their personally owned vehicle safely, prudently when on duty. And whether you drive directly to the scene or members have to drive to the firehouse, we still need to do this. And do it right off the bat when members first join. Think about a new member joining. They're probably excited to start going to calls. He or she may not even be aware that they're driving a little bit faster because they're in a hurry to get to that incident or to the firehouse. They may think they have certain rights or privileges. Perhaps they don't have to wear seat belts, or they can proceed through a red light or a stop sign. Even if they come to a complete stop, I'm a volunteer firefighter on the way to a fire. I can disregard these rules of the road. So just like teaching members to drive the fire apparatus is so important, we need to teach the drivers of personal vehicles that it's just as important to drive with due regard, obey all traffic control devices, and buckle up. There's no protective shield that's automatically going to protect them simply because they're a firefighter responding to an incident. There's no special exemptions or special privileges that are granted either because you're a volunteer firefighter. And again, folks, these rules apply whether you're driving to the firehouse or to the scene directly. You're not exempt from rules of the road. And you need to tell your members that. And you need to remind your members that. And we often do it when talking about driving the big rigs. And we often fail to do it when talking about driving our personal vehicle. It's, oh, you're here? Great, let's go to work. Never given a thought to personal vehicle operations. So start talking about it right away. Talk about it when a new member joins. Make it part of your new member orientation program or whatever program you have when new members step foot into the firehouse. And work on it throughout the year. Have it as part of a regular training drill on a regular basis to remind your members. And document it. Because if it's not documented, you didn't do it. And after that accident, you're going to get the knock on the door and you're going to have a request to see the training documents. Who trained them? What did they train on? And how much time was spent on it? You know what? It's another good idea to run license checks on your members. There's been more than one account of a volunteer firefighter being involved in a terrible accident, only to find out afterwards that that firefighter had a suspended or a revoked license. It doesn't matter if they're driving their personal vehicle or the fire vehicle. See, many people might only really care about their license when they train them how to drive the fire vehicles. In my opinion, no, run it right away. Run their license background check when they first join. In New York State, we're lucky, and I know this exists in other states as well. We have the LENS program. It's the License Event Notification System. New member will give us their license number, and we submit it to LENS, and they run a check to make sure that the firefighter has a license, and then it sets us up for notifications if that license is ever suspended. And you can also be notified for traffic infractions. You can set the parameters for what you want to be notified for with this with this member's driving record. It's a great system. We do it immediately when a new member joins, and we continue to monitor all through their career in the fire department by getting regular updates. And you can set the parameters as to what you want to be updated on. But at the very least, it ensures that they're licensed and legally allowed to drive. If your state doesn't have the license event notification system, I'm pretty sure you can still do it through whoever provides your insurance coverage. You could talk to your insurance provider about doing it, but we should be doing regular license checks on our new members and as they become apparatus drivers. I know a lot of people do it with the apparatus driving. We're not here to talk about the apparatus driving tonight and things that should be in place for that, but you should definitely consider it for all your members to make sure they're legally allowed to drive their own personal vehicle, because again, they're on duty when they're responding to someone's call for help. You might have to have them sign a release for that, and that's okay. We do it for our LENS program. No one's ever given us a hard time. If they want to drive, they sign the release. If they want to be a member of our department, they sign the release. No one's ever questioned it. A great system. One other thing that's kind of neat, consider is to host a defensive driver class for your members. And I'm not talking about emergency vehicle apparatus courses like EVOC. Again, that's a great class for emergency vehicle drivers, but we're not talking about that tonight. I'm talking about a defensive driver class that you can offer your members that's geared for driving personal motor vehicles. Now, some are forced to take classes like this if they've been involved in an accident or maybe get too many traffic tickets and have a lot of points on their license. But you can have a class like this even for good drivers. So consider hosting a defensive driver class for your entire membership. There's a lot of good reasons to do it. The members can refresh driver skills, they can learn critical driver safety techniques, they become more knowledgeable about vehicle and traffic laws, and yes, you can definitely reduce fines and points if you have traffic infractions, and that's great. All of this also helps the member save a little bit on their personal car insurance cost. All of this also continues to send the message to the members about the importance of driving with due regard and safely operating their personally owned vehicle. Now, many instructors, if they know they're doing it for a fire department, they'll even tailor it a little bit and focus on some fire service issues and maybe tell some stories that are fire service related, because they'll gear it to the fire service audience to help get that message out to them just a little bit more pointedly about driving personally owned vehicles in the fire service. We also extended it to our family members. We offer it, it's every 3 years we have to recertify, so every 3 years in January, it's like the first 2 Wednesdays for our training drill night for 3 hours at a time. And then what we do is one Sunday during January, we invite all our family members up to sit through the class because it helps them out as well. It can help the entire family save on their auto insurance, which is nice. I put all 4 of my daughters go through it and my wife, and they still regularly take the refresher classes every 3 years. If they're in town, my daughters go to college and work, but if it works in with their college and work schedule, they're there. It's just a tremendous benefit. It's a tremendous resource, not just for the individual member, but for the department too. And it's definitely something that can enhance your professional reputation, again, as a member and collectively as a department. So those are all some good things that should go into policies and ideas about a driver training program regarding personally owned vehicles. Now let's talk about driving directly to the scene as opposed to having to drive directly to the firehouse. Now, in many areas of the country, they have no choice but to allow members to drive their personal vehicle directly to the scene. Many departments protect very large areas, and it would be impractical to mandate that every firefighter has to drive to the firehouse. I've met firefighters whose first due district is 5 square miles. So driving a personal vehicle directly to the firehouse might be impractical because it could be 100 miles away. That is impossible for me to comprehend because in my district, my department, our district is only 6 square miles. So, um, one thing that the incident commanders don't always like about driving directly to the scene is the incident commander might not know exactly who's coming and can't be assured that there's a full complement of crew members on the incoming apparatus. So that's one of the arguments some people will make about why they want firefighters to go directly to the scene. The incident commander can be overwhelmed, and members can arrive at all different times and can report in to him or her, and it complicates matters and contributes to what already can be a confusing, complicated, and chaotic environment. Now, with the use of apps today, that can really help out a volunteer incident commander. They can get a better grasp on who's coming. Members can respond on a phone app like I Am Responding. The incident commander can now see how many firefighters are on the way, and he can also see if they're responding to the scene or to the station to get on a rig. So it really can help them make a decision on people power, on duty assignments, and mutual aid as people are already on their way to the scene. Now, if you do allow members to drive directly to the scene, and again, a lot of departments do, it's a great idea to have a plan of action. And I've seen some really nice plans, SOPs, SOGs, best practices, whatever you want to call them. I've seen some great ones that cleanly lay out operating procedures that allow those members that are arriving in their personal vehicles to seamlessly blend in with members arriving on the fire apparatus. That it leads to a very well coordinated and planned out plan of attack. It takes a little work to do this. That's what leaders do. They put the plan together now so it's not a dysfunctional mess on the fire ground. Because remember, dysfunction is not the trademark of any professional organization, and dysfunction can easily happen when members come in their own personal vehicle at all different times, and if nothing's planned for, they can easily freelance and do what they want to do, or maybe jump in with a crew that was already put together and accounted for, and now the incident commander or accountability officer doesn't even know they're there. But it can work, and it can be very successful. And many departments have no choice but to follow this plan where members come in their own vehicles. But it takes work to plan it out and have members know what to do when they arrive on scene. My department has allowed members to drive directly to the scene ever since I joined back in 1982. It's always worked well for us. There's a few reasons for it. One of them is we have a really good mix of members and drivers who live close to the firehouse. A lot of these drivers drive regularly, so getting rigs out is usually not a problem if some of our members report directly to the scene. Again, our territory is only about 6 square miles, and we have volunteers in pretty much every corner of the district, so we've got some going to the scene directly and others that live near the firehouse that are going to get the rigs out. Now, here's an advantage of going directly to the scene. The call could easily be right around the corner from where you are, where you're driving at that moment, or maybe where you live. It can be right around the corner. We provide a basic EMS kit to all of our members. So many times for medical calls, a volunteer member can arrive on scene in their personal vehicle and start basic first aid right away. It's another plus of driving directly to the scene. Faster care for EMS patients. And we've had many success stories over the years, having a member arrive at a medical call and start immediate and life-saving actions because they happen to be in the neighborhood. Heck, we've had choking calls, bleeding control issues, childbirth. We delivered many babies over the years, and even minor calls, but to the parent of the injured child or the husband whose wife is very ill, they're so comforted by the quick arrival of caring and competent EMS or first aid professionals. You know, on a side note, another neat thing we did in my town, there's 10 departments in my town. There's 16 departments in the 3 towns that make up our chief's organization group that gets together on a monthly basis to talk about matters of united concern. They instituted what's called an echo response policy. Some of you may know what that is, some might not. Basically, an echo response is when the communication center dispatcher who takes the 911 call realizes that it is a medical call that is an immediate threat to somebody's life, a cardiac arrest, severe bleeding, severe trauma, whatever the case may be. The dispatcher can announce on the air that it's an echo response, and what that means is any firefighter in the immediate area that is trained and maybe equipped, because so many carry EMS kits, trained and equipped to help in an emergency medical incident, they can respond directly to the scene and render care. And many times over the years, we've had department members who are in a district that it's not their call, it's not their department's call, but they're in another department's district. When that department gets toned out and they're around the corner, it's deemed an echo response. They can go directly to the scene and give care. Echo response, a great tool. And again, it means if you're medically trained and equipped, and a call is dispatched as an echo, if you're in the area, even if it's not your first due area, you can go to the scene and help out. And we have done that in my town for 10 years or so now, and it's worked out very, very good. It's monitored. We don't have people doing it for just the routine calls and things like that, but for serious life-threatening calls, when a dispatcher says this is an echo response, then they can go, and it's worked out well. And we've had a lot of success stories with that for medical calls over the years. Now, the question always comes up with regards to personal vehicle response. Okay, you make a good case for the medical call, immediate life-saving care, but what about fires? What's the advantage or disadvantage of driving directly to the scene for fire calls? On one hand, you maybe have less members arriving on the apparatus, and that might not be a good thing. And you might not have drivers for the rig, and that's one of the big concerns, that if people are going directly to the scene, now we don't have drivers for the rigs. Too many are taking their personal vehicles to the scene. Very, very legitimate concerns. But on the other hand, you might have a bunch of firefighters who came in their personal vehicle, geared up and ready to go when the apparatus does roll up. Let's say you do have a good response. The apparatus does get out quickly because members that live near the firehouse are going and getting the rig out. I always lived a little bit away from the firehouse. It was always easier for me to keep the gear in my car and drive directly to the scene in most cases, and I did it for years. And I can tell you that many, many, many times at working fires, I arrived on scene before our first arriving apparatus because it was in my neighborhood or not that far from where I was. Our chiefs carry SCBA. The chief, the overall incident commander, usually wasn't going to wear his SCBA because he's outside running the call. So I always grabbed his SCBA. And I was geared up, and I was packed up, and I was ready to go when that engine pulled up. And I got in on many, many, many first-in attack lines by doing that. Today, my gear is at the firehouse, and I respond to the firehouse. And there's a dichotomy there, keeping the gear at the firehouse as opposed to in the personal vehicle. There's good and bad. Let me talk about that. When you respond directly to the scene, you probably have your gear in your car, right? Makes sense. You're going directly to the scene. I'm talking for fire calls here, right? For fire type incidents. That works great when that call's in your neighborhood, or again, where you happen to be, because you can go directly to the scene, can be geared up and ready to go when the engine gets there. A good advantage here, providing you have a number of drivers and many that live near the firehouse, is we can put a crew to work quickly. The rig rolls quick. Maybe it just has a driver and one other person, but when it gets on location, there's 2 or 3 firefighters already geared up. Some cases might be packed up and ready to go. But it can also look bad. Drivers that you regularly have aren't around, or someone thought someone else was getting the rig out, and now you got a lot of firefighters standing around waiting for the trucks to arrive, and maybe people yelling at them. Real dichotomy there. You're there. It's a great thing. The rig isn't there. Not so great, because you can't do much to fight the fire without some fire trucks, right? Having your gear in your personal vehicle can also present an issue when you're at the firehouse. Say you're at the firehouse and a call comes in. What do you got to do? Where's your gear? A lot of times it's out in your personal vehicle in the parking lot. So now you got to run out of the firehouse, to the parking lot, get your gear or gear bag. Sometimes if it's not in a bag, you're dropping gear as you're running back into the firehouse, right? There goes your helmet. Oop, the boot fell out of the pant leg. It looks comical, but it's delaying your response. In my firehouse, it's quite a run from inside the firehouse to the parking lot, back into the firehouse, down a hallway, out to the apparatus bay. And then you get to that point and you're putting your gear on, and the chief holds everything up because he found out it's an alarm malfunction. And there you are, tired and sweating and exhausted, and you didn't even get a chance to get out on the rig because it took a while to get your gear from the car out to the apparatus bay and put it on. Conversely, let's say it's a real fire. Now the response isn't as good as it could have been because many members that were at the firehouse had to run out, get their gear, and then put it on. It delayed the response. So, how do we solve that? Well, I can tell you that what we used to do was always carry our gear into the firehouse with us. Anytime we came to the fire hall, we carried our gear in. And that worked on training nights and drill nights when we were going to be there for several hours, but we might not have been inclined to bring our gear in when we were just stopping in for 20 minutes or so to get a soda, to get some ice, just to say hi to the guys and gals in the club room and then leave. But then that call comes in, right? And now you got to run out and get your gear. So, in my case, after 27 years as an officer and as a commissioner, 27 years as an officer and now as a commissioner, I would come into the firehouse with something. In addition to my gear, I'd have a briefcase or my gym bag to work out in the fitness room, or my briefcase, gym bag, and gear. And every time I would come in, it was a struggle to balance everything. And things would fall and blow away. And so after doing this for years, recently I decided the time had come for me to leave my gear in the firehouse. 38 years in the department, I got to say for the first 35 I carried my gear with me in my personal vehicle, but not anymore. It's not always the best for me when that incident's in my neighborhood. I got to go to the firehouse and get my gear, but it works for me now when I come up to the firehouse with my gym bag, with my briefcase with firehouse work that I'm going to be doing. That's all I have to carry in. And then if a call comes in while I'm at the firehouse, in the club room, wherever, I don't have to run out to my car to get my gear. It's hanging in the locker. True dichotomy exists there for sure. Whatever works for you, figure it out and do what works for your department. Some departments, hey, they get around that by purchasing 2 sets of gear. One is in the vehicle and one stays at the firehouse. To me, that's easier said than done. It's a great idea, but let's face it, it's a budget killer. Not a lot of companies can afford to issue 2 sets of gear to all their members. Then imagine this. Imagine a second set of boots, a second helmet, a second pair of gloves, a second set of bailout equipment, which is not cheap. Every firefighter also carries certain tools and other things that they like to have that personalizes that gear. Now you need twice as many of everything, and it's just impractical to think that's the simple solution to the situation we're talking about here. And in my department, we don't even have enough gear rack space for all our members. We have, I think, 35 or 40 gear lockers, and our membership roster is currently at about 65 members. In the recent past, we've been as high as the mid-70s. So we have really nice gear racks with lock boxes, and they're relatively brand new, but we only have 35 or 40 spots. We need members to also carry gear in their personally owned vehicle. That leads to another interesting discussion. Do you want your members to carry their turnout gear in the personal vehicle today? Do you want to mandate them not to carry it in their vehicle? What do you think is right here? I mean, we're all well aware of the cancer epidemic ravaging the fire service and the focus on making sure we keep our gear clear and the very real concerns about the off-gassing of the dangerous products from fires. Do we want that off-gassing in our personally owned vehicles? Now you know, when you walk into a firehouse, you know immediately if they've had a fire, or maybe we're training at a smokehouse, don't you? How? Because you smell it. And for years, I drove around with that smell in my car, even as a chief officer, right? After a fire or a smokehouse drill, drove around and I exposed myself and anyone else in the vehicle to those toxic gases. We never thought about it being a problem. It wasn't a thing back in the day. But today we're more aware of it. We also know we need to wash our gear. So we get it to the extractor, we wash it. But even there's usually delays, and it might not be done for a couple of days after the fire. So you're still driving around while it's off gassing. Something to think about. Do you want your members carrying gear in the car? If you allow them to drive directly to the scene, what's the safest way to do it? I imagine they're selling things online now that can contain your gear inside. And it's probably something you're going to want to look at, especially for chiefs, because they're going directly to the scene, right? Chiefs and incident commanders. It's a hot topic right now. It really is. Something to think about. Something as a professional to talk about and do what's right for your organization. Another thing to think about when carrying gear in your personally owned vehicle and driving directly to the scene, and I bet many of you have experienced this from time to time. What happens when you bring a different vehicle to the firehouse or the incident scene? And it's not until you open the trunk or go to the back and lift up the hatch that you realize, oh my gosh, I have my husband's car or I have my girlfriend's car. And now you have no gear at all. It can happen. Sometimes you don't even think about it. I remember being at a working fire once. We were at a working apartment building fire. Good attic fire, struck by lightning, good working fire. I pull in. I'm a young assistant chief. I pull in. I'm putting my gear on. One of our members who carries his gear in his own personal car, because he actually was not a district member. He lived in a district over from ours, but stayed with us because he originally joined with us, so we let him stay. He pulls up and he opens up the trunk of the car he has, and the next thing I see is him slamming the trunk down as hard as he can. The next thing I hear is a pretty nasty expletive. He realized he took his wife's car to the fire because that was the first one in the driveway, or last one in the driveway, however you look at it. His car was blocked in. Middle of the night, it's like 3 a.m. He's really not thinking clearly, so he just jumps in his wife's car and drives to the fire. And when he gets there, he realizes, oh no, my gear's not even here. After I hear the slam of the trunk, after I hear the expletive, the next thing I see and hear is him driving away to go home and get his gear and miss out on the fire attack because he had to drive home to get his gear. It actually did happen. And it's just another thing to think of. Heck, now since I've left my gear at the firehouse, it's helped me because if I want to go to a call, sometimes I have 4 daughters and my wife, sometimes we've had 5 cars in my driveway, and I can jump in the first car that's nearest the street and go to the call. I don't have to worry about moving cars, or another thing, I don't have to bring my gear. I used to bring my gear in the wintertime because there's nothing worse than standing outside and putting gear on in the freezing cold winters or a rainstorm. So that's another pro and of or con, however you want to look at it, of carrying your gear with you. Even if your department does allow driving your vehicle directly to the scene, let's talk about some incidents where you still might want to really think twice about allowing it. First off, how about new members? You probably don't want a new member with little training or experience going in their personally owned vehicle. They could really get on location and have no idea what they're facing. They could easily get hurt, or they could do something to really hurt the operation. Maybe the pressure's on to do something and they really don't know what to do. But they say, I had to do something. So in areas where it's still not practical to maybe have everyone go to the firehouse, maybe with new members you want them to be trained to wait outside until an experienced member or an officer gets there. It just makes sense to not let new members respond directly to the scene, or if they do respond directly to the scene, they wait for experienced, tenured members and officers to help guide them when they arrive on location. Maybe high-speed highways like an interstate thruway, not a good idea to send your members up there. In my area, we don't allow personal vehicles up there for safety reasons. Heck, it's dangerous enough, isn't it, when we're on the thruways or high-speed highways and we have the protection of our big trucks? It's still dangerous enough. So we don't want our members up there with their personally owned vehicles. And again, we can easily do this in my area because the districts are small. We can have our members go to the firehouse and get there in a decent amount of time to get on a rig. Not as easy in some departments that have large districts, and they may very well allow members to drive on the thruway or interstates or high-speed highways. But this is where a policy comes in. When do you allow it? What are the safety precautions that maybe you've taken? And what else can you do? Is there another option you can consider with other than members getting up on the highway? I've heard of some where members are allowed to wait at certain entrance ramps. The truck comes to a complete stop, the fire truck, and the members can then board it if there's room for them. But it's something to talk about and plan for ahead of time. Other incidents you might want to consider not allowing members to drive directly to the scene for, and again, depends on your district size and makeup, but maybe you don't want members to respond to hazardous material type calls or calls involving police response like assaults or other crimes. We don't want our members rolling up on an active incident before police have the situation under control, right? We don't want our members rolling up on a hazmat incident with gases or some sort of dangerous chemical in the air. Something to think about, maybe limiting response in personal vehicles to those types of incidents, and even a mutual aid response. My area frowns upon members driving their personal vehicle to mutual aid incidents. We like the accountability. We like the control that comes with having members responding to the firehouse. They can be assigned a crew spot. Someone can keep track of who's getting on the rig. But again, we can do this because we have small districts and it doesn't take a long time to get members to the firehouse to jump on board the rig. If your area can't do it, think about ahead of time how you can account for members coming in their personal vehicles at a mutual aid incident. Think about these things ahead of time. Put it into a policy that works for your department. Review that policy regularly. Other things to consider if you're allowing members to take their personal vehicles directly to the scene, have your members think about parking and parking out of the way. More than once, I have witnessed a firefighter park at the scene of a fire and actually park in front of a hydrant. And we think cops are bad at this, don't we? But I can tell you, I have seen hyped up firefighters do it as well. I've also seen firefighters pull into the driveway of the house that's on fire. And even parking next door to the house that's on fire. Probably not a good idea. So tell your members, slow down. It's a worker, yes, we love to go to fires, don't we? But park out of the way. Try and get off the road. Get into another driveway, not the house or neighbor's house, but get into a driveway if you can. Now, some consider out of the way to be up on somebody's lawn. I've seen that get ugly. In my area, you might have a really nice manicured lawn out there. That's the hallmark of suburbia, right? Well, chances are the homeowner's not going to be happy with a volunteer firefighter up on their lawn, especially if it's been raining or the ground is soft, and when that firefighter leaves, they leave big ruts. It's just something to think about and to talk about ahead of time. Some people are very good about it. Their neighbor's house is burning. Do what you got to do. I don't care where you're parking. But man, if it's a routine burnt toast call or a relatively minor call, they're going to be upset when that volunteer firefighter leaves and there's ruts or lawn damage. And that's going to damage your department's professional reputation. So talk about this with your members. Get on board with some common ideas on what you should do. Especially talk about it with your newer members. Don't block the hydrants. Don't pull in the driveways of the house that's burning or even next door. Think about where your apparatus is going to be parking and stay out of the way there. Think about where hydrant hose might lay and avoid that. I used to tell my firefighters that were coming in their own personal vehicles to consider parking down by the hydrant we were going to be getting our supply from. We reverse lay at most of our fires, so if a firefighter parks near the hydrant, the feeder hydrant, they can be there. He or she is there ready to assist when the engine gets there, and it really can help expedite hooking up the hydrant. And parking issues are not limited just to fires, are they? Traffic can be a mess at any motor vehicle accident, and now if you allow members to drive directly to the scene, you have members arriving in their own personal vehicles trying to figure out where to park and park safely and stay out of the way while keeping traffic moving, and it can be really hard and it can be tough. And I've seen it even at routine medical calls. where parking has been an issue. I've seen an ambulance get blocked in a driveway because a volunteer firefighter pulled up and blocked the driveway, just not thinking. They want to help. They get out of their car and run up to help the patient, but they're not thinking that, hey, you're blocking the driveway, and when an ambulance needs to leave, if you're not around, now we got to waste time looking for you to move your car. So think about it. Think about what you can do ahead of time if you allow responding to the scene in personally owned vehicles. And think about policies that make sense for your area. And as I said, in many areas, there's departments that mandate all members have to drive to the firehouse and they have to respond to the scene from the firehouse. And they have very good reasons for doing that, and it works great for them. So let's talk about that. If everyone drives to the firehouse, that's the way to ensure the rigs are going to get out, right? The leaders are worried that if not everyone drove to the firehouse, they may not get the rigs out in a timely manner. And that's certainly a legitimate concern, because you can't have a bunch of firefighters standing around with no truck or equipment when it's needed. Yes, we talked about there's certainly things members can do. If they do drive directly to the scene, they can render that immediate medical care. They can also confirm that maybe a fire alarm activation is burnt food or burnt popcorn or a malfunction or something like that. In no way am I advocating, I can hear it already, oh, you don't want members investigating smoke conditions. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm talking about when the homeowner meets a firefighter at the front door and says, look, here's my burnt popcorn, or we were changing the battery on the smoke detector that's wired to the central station. That's what set the alarm off. Hey, a firefighter can now confirm that, maybe get a word to the responding units to slow them down. Slower response can reduce our chance for accidents, right? That's part of the professional response as well. So there's things that can be done by members going directly to the scene, but if that's not what the company allows, that's okay. That's okay. All members responding to the fire hall ensures the rigs get out. It also will prevent that new member from getting in trouble at the scene, because now they can respond with an experienced tenured officer or firefighter. So now you don't have to worry about new members getting in over their head if they're the first arriving at the scene. Accountability is certainly easier when all members come on a rig. Mentioned how easily members who arrive in their personal vehicle can get lost at an incident. A member coming in their personal vehicle can easily slide into the action, right? And they go unnoticed, they go unaccounted for, especially in those chaotic and evolving incidents like any structure fire can be. And then something bad happens, such as a collapse, a mayday situation, and nobody even knows that that member came in their personal vehicle and slid into the scene. If you're going to allow direct personal vehicle response to the scene, you need solid operational game plans as to how the members will assimilate. So some simply prefer not to, and their answer is all members have to respond on the fire apparatus. And that works for them, and that's the end of the discussion. They feel that if they come on the rig, they have better control, and since the rig responds with a minimum number of firefighters, they have a decent idea as to how many firefighters will be arriving, and they can plan appropriately. They think they have a better chance of a full crew complement since all members have to go to the firehouse. So it just makes sense that more firefighters will be responding on the rig. And when that rig does roll, it has a minimum number of members on it that are going. They're more confident that that rig has at least several firefighters on it. Now, in the scenario where members can drive directly to the scene, a driver may assume some members drove directly to the scene, so they may leave where it's just them. And now they get there and there's nobody else there, and they got problems because they're all alone. Again, an app can help with that. The driver can see how many members are going directly to the scene. Before responding, they can see how many are coming to the firehouse and maybe wait for people. That leads to another interesting discussion, another interesting debate. How many need to be on the rig before it rolls? Some departments do a driver only, again assuming others are going to be waiting at the scene when they pull up. Maybe they use the app now and they can confirm others are going to be on the scene when they roll up. Some departments have a minimum, 2 or 3 firefighters. Some want a full rig. Can wait a long time for a full rig in the volunteer fire service. Whatever works for you, figure it out ahead of time. What's best for your department? And there's another advantage of having all members go together on the rigs. And that is you can do riding assignments. Such as seat 1, you're the nozzle firefighter. Seat 2, you're the backup firefighter. Seat 3, you have the irons, etc. You get the idea, right? We've all heard about riding assignments. I've heard pros and cons. I've heard a lot of great success stories, and most of them are when they have all members report to the firehouse, get on the apparatus, and then respond to the call. However you do it, a lot of thought must be put into it. In my opinion, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. You have to figure out what's best for your department, what's best for your area, and write it down and then train on it. Then train on it. Then train on it. Then review it. And then train on it some more. The more you train, the more you talk about it, the better aware everybody is, the less dysfunction you have at the emergency scene. The less dysfunction you have, the more professional your operation is. There's one other aspect of driving personally owned vehicles that I wanted to quickly cover with you on this podcast. Do you allow your members to have warning lights in their personally owned vehicle? If so, what are your rules? What are your policies? Are they known? Are they reviewed? Is there a process that is followed before a member is allowed to purchase a light, or can they just go out and buy anything they want and slap it on their vehicle? Chief, what's the policy? What's the training on that policy? How are your members reminded about what your policy is? And it's best to figure this out ahead of time. Have it written down before a member is involved in an accident and he or she had that light flashing on their dashboard. When talking about lighting, I refer to emergency lights much like are on the fire apparatus. Those require vehicles to pull out of the way. Courtesy lights simply ask the driving public to yield the way to the responding volunteer. Emergency lights on personal vehicles, that varies by state to state. Some states allow them, some states don't. Some require authorization to display them, so it's best to know what your area's laws are. So check with your local law enforcement, check with your attorney, find out what's allowed in your area. Courtesy lights, which in my area are blue, because we never used to have blue lights on emergency apparatus or police cars, fire trucks until the last few years, but courtesy lights, they identify a volunteer responder, could also be a volunteer ambulance member, and they ask the vehicles to provide the courtesy of moving out of the way so the volunteer responder can pass by. But if we're not careful, if our organizations aren't careful, our members can get in a lot of trouble, and so can our departments. Again, we have to inform our members that even with that light, you need to drive with due regard. You need to drive appropriately, whether it's an emergency light or a courtesy light. And with courtesy lights, you need to really emphasize that with your new members, because chances are they're excited, everything is new, they have this cool new flashing light, they feel empowered. It's, maybe the foot gets a little heavier on the accelerator, stop signs maybe become optional, or you roll through the stop sign. The professional volunteer fire department needs to take this seriously and consider what it's doing to educate members, as well as ensure what they are allowing is legal and safe for their area. And we all know firefighters who love lights, right? The more the better. But it's not just a question of if it's safe. It's a question of if it's legal. And in my state, in New York State, pretty strict when it comes to courtesy lights on volunteer firefighters' personally owned vehicle. Before any volunteer can display a light in New York, they need written permission from the chief. Now, it can take any form. Generally, it's given via what we call a blue light card, and that's what it is, a card signed by the chief identifying the firefighter and authorizing him or her to display 1, one as in the number one blue light. It also outlines very clearly, and members are told the first time they get the card and reminded of it regularly, that the light is a privilege and in no way is a right. The chief may revoke the firefighter's authorization to use the light at any time. Whenever a member came to me asking for a blue light card, I didn't just hand it to him. I'd say, "Come on in, sit down, let's talk." And I would remind them about these rules of the courtesy light, that it was a courtesy and it grants no special privileges, and all speed limits and traffic rules were to be followed. Also in our state, our volunteer members are allowed, as I said, one light only, one blue light only on their personal vehicle, and it has to be visible from the front of the vehicle. Heck, even the style of light is regulated in our area. The light must have a blue lens, not an uncolored lens with a blue bulb. It cannot be part of the headlight system either. And if it's mounted inside the vehicle, it has to have a cover to prevent glare and distractions to the driver. It also prohibits lights that are blinding or distracting, such as strobes. Even a single light fixture that contains multiple lights that flash alternately are prohibited as well. Interestingly, Uber, the ride-sharing service that so many of us use, they use blue lights in New York too, and that clearly says Uber on the light, and it doesn't flash, but at least one notable fire service attorney feels that that's a violation of New York state law. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, Uber using blue lights. I've also heard, this is something that might be important to you, I've also heard certain insurance providers only insure vehicles if it's a non-emergency vehicle. And it's defining an emergency vehicle as a vehicle that's owned and operated by a firefighter and or displaying a light. So be aware of that. Check with your carrier. Again, I've heard of certain insurance providers that will only insure vehicles if it's a non-emergency vehicle. And it defines an emergency vehicle as any vehicle owned and operated by a firefighter and or displaying at least one light. So be aware of that and check into it. Not sure what the rules and laws are in your state, but it's a good idea that you check into it and find out and follow them and remind your members what those rules are, because that's the professional thing to do. Now, some prohibit driving directly to the scene, some allow driving to the scene. Do what's right for your area. And something else to consider when in your own personal vehicle, and it's extremely important to pass on to your members as well, because this can definitely impact your professional reputation and hurt your professional image. This applies when driving to an incident in your own vehicle, driving to the firehouse in your own vehicle, or even just out and about doing routine driving, shopping, running kids around, whatever. We love to identify ourselves as firefighters, right? We have those lights, we have the license plates, we have the stickers. Those stickers, I always talk about how that was another one of the most coveted possessions my volunteers used to ask for when I was chief. Get the knock on the door, "Chief, I got a new vehicle." The minute they got a new vehicle, they wanted a sticker for it. I think they had they all thought they were going to get out of traffic tickets with that sticker, so they wanted one before their new car even had 2 miles on it. But all of these things, the stickers, the lights, the license plates, they all identify you as a firefighter. They identify you as a member of your hometown volunteer fire department. Remember that as you're driving around town. How are you acting? How are you driving? And when responding to a call, be extra cognizant of how you act, because chances are people aren't going to get out of your way. They're not going to yield you the way with your courtesy light in a lot of cases. Even if you have emergency lights on, they're going to slam their brakes on. They're just not going to do what you expect them to do. They're going to turn in front of you. They're going to drive slower than you want them to. Whatever it is, they're not going to do what you expect them to do. And you're going to get angry, and you may lash out at the driver who's not doing what you want. Think about that. You're representing your department. If you start lashing into somebody, yelling at them, flipping them off, you're making a bad impression on yourself and the department, because they're going to drive by and see the sticker on your car or know that you're a member of the department. And think about that driver. They may have family in the car. They may have young children, elderly parents. What image do you want to leave with them as a firefighter? What image do you want to leave of our fire service, of your department? Remember, you're representing all of it when you display any of those insignias representative of the fire service. Remember that license plate with the volunteer fire department logo, your blue courtesy light, your emergency light, that fire department sticker that so proudly identifies you as a member of your hometown volunteer fire department, and your actions. They're there for everybody to see, and they can highlight what a true professional you are or highlight quite the opposite. Those things, those stickers, lights, hats, shirts, everything we wear, everything we display, leaves us with a duty to behave appropriately and to behave professionally. So remember that when you drive to the firehouse, to the emergency call, or just about town. It is so important, folks, to take all this into consideration. It all adds into the professional equation. You know, I heard Chief Billy Goldfeder once talk about line of duty deaths, and he mentioned how, our families, our loved ones, they know that as firefighters, we can put our life on the line for someone in need. As horrible as it is, they know we may be prepared to sacrifice ourselves attempting to help someone in peril, or how something real tragic and unexpected can happen at an emergency scene. And unfortunately, that's been experienced by so many. So many family members have been personally affected by the loss of a firefighter loved one. But as Chief Goldfeder explained it, perhaps they can take some comfort, some solace, by understanding their loved one died in the performance of their duty. They died attempting to help someone in peril, in harm's way. They died attempting to preserve life and property. But how hard to accept the fact that their loved one died simply because they did not buckle up, simply because they didn't obey a posted speed limit or a stop sign, simply because they drove their personal vehicle to an emergency call and missed that red light. No less tragic, for sure still a line of duty death, and a death that occurred in the performance of their duty, but maybe, just maybe, an example of a line of duty death we can help prevent through awareness and through education, which is the professional thing to do. Something to think about. Thanks to Tim Zender for sparking my interest on this topic and helping me form the basis for this episode. Again, check out his article from July 31st on fireengineering.com, Personal Vehicle Response in the Fire Service. Review where you are on this matter. Do what is best in your area. Do what works for your department and make it work safely by implementing and training on and reviewing good policy, good best practice, good procedures, whatever you call it. Have a good program in place for personal vehicle operations. Make it work for you. Because as the saying goes, a safe arrival is no accident. I'd like to again thank Fire Engineering and Chief Bobby Halton and Clarion Events for supporting these podcasts, mine as well as all the other great podcasts covering so many topics within our great fire service, and I'm honored to be among them, and I'm honored that you choose to listen into my show. And I remain committed to all of you to continue to focus on topics of relevance and importance to our great, iconic volunteer fire service. If you'd like to reach out to me, please feel free to send me an email, tamerrill63@aol.com. Be sure to check out any of my social media platforms, including the Professional Volunteer Fire Department on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm always posting informational articles, information, and motivational words of wisdom to help all of us better navigate the volunteer fire service world we're part of. I'm also now on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, The Professional Volunteer to Fire Department. I currently have all the podcasts available for your listening pleasure, and I also added a lot of cool historical videos. I'm a big fire service history buff, and I'm going to be adding a lot of historical videos, and there's already a lot on there, so please feel free to check it out and subscribe. I'd be honored if you did that. And I have a lot more coming. I got a new revised modern website coming out in the near future, and I would just love to hear from all of you. So feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media platforms available on the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, or at email tamerrill63@aol.com. My next show, scheduled for Tuesday, September 29th. I can promise you I will have another great topic or topics for discussion regarding our volunteer fire service. And thank you so much for tuning in. Wherever you happen to be, thanks for listening. Please stay safe, and remember, folks, that developing, maintaining, and portraying a professional image is the duty and responsibility of all firefighters, paid or volunteer. It's really that simple. No matter where you are, no matter who you serve, remember, your residents are owed professional service delivered by professional firefighters representing professional organizations. Take care, folks.